Trump's quiet visit to a dying supporter. The story no one heard until now. Imagine this. A billionaire businessman turned politician sneaks out of his heavily guarded estate late at night, bypassing Secret Service protocols, to visit a dying supporter in a small town nobody's ever heard of. This isn't fiction. It's real. And what happened during that quiet meeting might change how you see one of the most polarizing figures in modern history. It was a cold, rainy evening in February 2020, the kind of night where the wind howls through empty streets, and even the streetlights seem dimmer than usual. In a tiny hospital room in rural Ohio, an elderly man named Harold Jenkins lay hooked up to machines that beeped steadily beside him. Harold wasn't rich or famous. He worked as a mechanic most of his life, fixing cars with grease-stained hands and a smile that could light up a room. But he had one claim to fame. He was one of Donald Trump's earliest supporters. Harold believed in Trump long before the rallies, the headlines, and the controversies. Back when Trump was just a guy thinking about running for president, Harold put up homemade signs in his front yard that read Trump 2016 because he thought the country needed someone who would shake things up. For years, Harold followed every speech, cheered at every debate, and defended Trump against anyone who criticized him, even his own family. But now, Harold was down to skin and bones, battling stage 4 cancer. His doctors said he didn't have much time left. Word somehow got out about Harold's condition, and it reached the ears of someone unexpected, the very man Harold had spent years supporting. Donald Trump, known for his larger-than-life personality and constant presence in the media, decided to do something almost unheard of. Without cameras, without reporters, and without telling anyone besides a few trusted aides, he made plans to visit Harold Jenkins. The question is, why? Why would a president, notorious for being surrounded by chaos and controversy, take time out of his busy schedule to see a dying mechanic from a town so small it barely shows up on a map? The journey to Harold's bedside wasn't easy. Trump didn't fly in his usual private jet or roll up in a motorcade with flashing lights. Instead, he traveled under the cover of darkness, riding in an unmarked black SUV with tinted windows. Even his closest advisors were kept in the dark about where he was going or why. Only 2 Secret Service agents accompanied him, far fewer than normal for someone of his status. When they arrived at the hospital, it was almost midnight. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few cars belonging to night shift nurses. Inside, the halls were quiet, lit only by soft overhead lights that cast long shadows on the walls. The staff didn't know who had just walked through their doors until one nurse recognized the unmistakable figure of Donald Trump standing near the elevator. Word spread quickly among the handful of people working that night. Whispers echoed down the corridors. "Is that really him? What's he doing here?" No one dared approach him directly, though. They watched from a distance as Trump moved toward room 214, the room where Harold Jenkins lay dying. As Trump stepped inside, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Harold's daughter, Sarah, sat beside her father's bed, holding his frail hand. She looked up, startled, when she saw the former president walk in. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she didn't know whether to cry, scream, or jump out of her chair. Trump nodded at her gently before turning his attention to Harold. The man who once filled rooms with energy now looked so small and fragile lying there, hooked up to tubes and wires. His chest rose and fell slowly, each breath shallow but steady. For a moment, Trump stood frozen, staring at the man whose unwavering support had helped propel him to the highest office in the land. Then came the first words out of Trump's mouth, spoken softly enough that only Sarah and Harold could hear them. "Harold, I'm here." But what happened next is what makes this story unforgettable, and something no one outside that room expected. As Trump stood there, his voice broke the silence again. "Harold," he said, leaning closer to the bed, "you were always there for me. Now it's my turn to be here for you." Sarah blinked back tears, unsure if she was dreaming. Was this really happening? Why would a man like Donald Trump, someone who lived in a world of luxury and power, take the time to visit her father, a simple mechanic from rural Ohio? And why now, when Harold was too weak to even speak? Trump pulled up a chair beside the bed and sat down. He didn't act like the larger-than-life figure everyone saw on TV. There were no grand gestures, no booming speeches, just a quiet, almost vulnerable side of him that few people had ever witnessed. For a while, he simply sat there, holding Harold's hand, as if trying to give him strength. But then, something strange happened. Harold's eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy and unfocused, but they locked onto Trump's face. His lips trembled, and though his voice was barely audible, he managed to whisper two words, "Thank you." Trump froze. It wasn't just gratitude in Harold's voice, it was relief. Like he'd been waiting years to say those words, and now, finally, he could let go. Before Trump could respond, Harold's eyes closed again. The machines monitoring his vitals started beeping faster, their rhythm growing erratic. Sarah gasped and reached for the call button, but Trump stopped her with a firm yet gentle hand on her arm. "Wait," he said quietly. "Let's not rush this." Seconds ticked by like hours. The room felt heavy, as though the weight of the entire world rested inside its four walls. Then, suddenly, the beeping slowed, steadied, and then flatlined. Harold Jenkins was gone. Sarah buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. But Trump didn't move. He stayed seated, staring at Harold's peaceful expression, his jaw clenched tight. After what felt like an eternity, he finally stood up, turned to Sarah, and said something that shocked her, and later everyone else who heard about it. "I'll make sure your dad is never forgotten." And with that, he walked out of the room, leaving behind more questions than answers. What did he mean by that promise? How far was he willing to go to honor it? And most importantly, why did he care so much? To understand why Donald Trump made that promise, and why it mattered so much, you need to know more about Harold Jenkins. He wasn't just some random supporter, he was a man who lived his life with grit, determination, and an unshakable belief in hard work. Born into poverty, Harold grew up in a trailer park where running water was considered a luxury. His dad left when he was 6, leaving his mom to raise 3 kids alone. Harold dropped out of high school at 16 to work full-time at a gas station. By 19, he'd saved enough money to buy his first toolbox and started fixing cars in his backyard. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and it gave him a sense of purpose. Over time, he built a reputation as the guy who could fix anything, no matter how broken it seemed. But Harold wasn't perfect. He had flaws, just like anyone else. He struggled with anger issues after years of being told he'd never amount to anything. He drank too much during tough times, and sometimes let his temper get the better of him. His marriage fell apart because of it, and for years, he barely spoke to his own daughter, Sarah. Then came the 2016 election. When Harold heard Donald Trump talk about bringing jobs back to America and standing up for the forgotten men and women, something clicked inside him. For the first time in years, he felt like someone understood what it was like to fight for everything you had, even if the odds were stacked against you. That's when Harold became one of Trump's biggest supporters. He didn't have much money, but he donated what little he could spare. He spent weekends knocking on doors and handing out flyers, even though his knees ached and his hands were calloused from years of working under cars. To Harold, this wasn't just about politics, it was personal. He saw himself in Trump, a fighter, a survivor, someone who refused to give up. As for Trump, he wasn't used to showing vulnerability. Most people only saw the brash, confident side of him, the man who thrived on attention and adoration. But behind closed doors, away from the cameras and crowds, he carried burdens most people couldn't imagine. The pressure of leading a nation, the constant attacks from critics, and the weight of knowing millions looked to him for answers, it all took its toll. So when Harold whispered those 2 words, "Thank you," it hit Trump harder than anyone might expect. In that moment, he wasn't thinking about polls or elections or headlines. He was thinking about Harold, about how this man, who had so little, gave so much to his family, to his community, and yes, to Trump himself. And maybe, just maybe, Trump saw a piece of himself in Harold too. 2 fighters, separated by wealth and fame, but united by a shared understanding of what it meant to keep going, no matter what. But none of this explains why Trump kept his promise, or what he did next. What happened next was something no one saw coming. Not Sarah, not the hospital staff, and certainly not the millions of people who later heard about this story. 2 days after Harold's passing, Sarah received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, a familiar voice greeted her. "Sarah, it's Donald Trump." Her heart skipped a beat. Why was he calling her? What could he possibly want now? "I made a promise to your father," Trump continued, his tone serious but kind, "and I intend to keep it." The next morning, Sarah woke up to find a fleet of black SUVs parked outside her modest home. Out stepped Trump himself, accompanied by several men in suits carrying briefcases. They weren't there for a photo op or a quick visit. They were there to deliver something extraordinary. Trump handed Sarah a document sealed in an official envelope. Inside was a letter written in his own handwriting. It read, "Harold Jenkins was more than just a supporter, he was a hero. A man who worked tirelessly to provide for his family, stood by his beliefs, and never gave up, even when life got tough. Because of him, countless others found hope in a brighter future. To honor his memory, I have established the Harold Jenkins Foundation, a fund dedicated to helping working-class families achieve their dreams, whether through education, business grants, or medical assistance. Harold will live on through the lives he continues to touch." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. The foundation came with a staggering endowment, $10 million, donated personally by Trump, but that wasn't all. In addition to the foundation, Trump revealed he had arranged for Harold's funeral expenses to be covered entirely, and ensured that Sarah would receive monthly financial support until she got back on her feet. It was an unprecedented gesture, especially coming from someone known for being fiercely protective of his wealth. Reporters scrambled to uncover details, but Trump refused to comment publicly. He simply said, "Some things aren't meant for headlines, they're meant for the heart." For Sarah, it changed everything. She went from struggling to pay bills to having the resources she needed to rebuild her life, all because of a promise made in a quiet hospital room late one night. But here's the twist. Months later, investigative journalists uncovered evidence suggesting that Harold Jenkins might not have been as ordinary as everyone thought. Hidden bank records revealed large, unexplained deposits into Harold's account over the past decade. The source: anonymous offshore companies linked to political campaigns. Suddenly, questions arose. Was Harold truly just a mechanic turned supporter, or was he part of something bigger? Did Trump know about these mysterious transactions? And if so, did they play a role in his decision to visit Harold that fateful night? No answers were ever confirmed, leaving the public divided. Some saw it as proof of corruption behind closed doors. Others viewed it as further evidence of Trump's loyalty to those who stood by him, regardless of their secrets. One thing was certain though, Harold Jenkins' name would never be forgotten. If you're sitting there wondering what to make of this story, trust me, you're not alone. This is one of those moments that reminds us how complicated people can be. Heroes aren't always perfect, and promises don't always come without strings attached, but at the end of the day, does it matter? Maybe what matters most is the impact someone leaves behind. So here's my question for you. What do you think about Trump's visit to Harold Jenkins? Do you believe it was a genuine act of kindness, or was there more to it than meets the eye? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more stories like this one. Every week I dig deep into untold tales from history, politics, and real life, stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Oh, and before I go, what other true crime or hidden stories should I cover next? Drop your ideas below, and who knows, your suggestion might just become my next video. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the quietest moments hold the loudest truths.